I was 20 years old. I made a mistake on this climb. It was a 500 or 600 foot climb, loss of our coordination, couldn't move our lips, eyeballs freezing in the back of my head. We stay here, we die. We might die if we fight our way off, but we're definitely going to die if we stay here. My instinctual, animalistic hyper focus of my body wanting to survive. It's like down deep inside my primordial brain of where I wasn't really rationally trying to survive at this point. My body was doing it for me. But once the rope got stuck, I my rational brain's like, oh, you're not getting out of this. There's death here now. And Peter was gone. There was no Peterness left at all. I was an orb of consciousness, knowing that I was not a human being. And I think that that was the radical shock of it all in the beginning, was that I knew I was not a human being. I saw other lives I had lived. I entered into previous lives and saw it through the eyes of those lives. And I know that I had lived many lives. I knew that my soul had an eternal nature to it and that could live inside of other lives. All of these lives were going on simultaneously. I was above them all and I was in them all at the same time, but none of them were really me. I was way far above any sort of physicality.
Welcome, everyone, to Our Sliver of Time. Today we have a very special guest, Peter Panagore. I don't know how we did it, but we got him, and we're going to have a fantastic conversation based around his near-death experience, but really we're going to kind of dive into a bunch of questions that we have. So I'm excited to speak with you today, Peter, and thanks for being here.
I'm super glad to be here, and I enjoyed our pre-show conversation a lot. So, if people want to see the full-blown story, my full-blown story, it's all over YouTube. You can Google me, Google, or use the search engine in YouTube. My story is well known, and it's going to be made into a movie. Fingers crossed. I've been working on it for 4 years, and it's available in book form. So you know my story. I'm going to give a little summary for people, if that's okay, and then I love your idea to have a conversation, because that's really where it's at for me. It's the results of the near-death experience, how I live it, how it's lived through me. That's what matters more than what happened to me, which completely changed my life. So in summary, I was 20 years old. I was an exchange student in the national program to Montana from Massachusetts. I went on, and it wasn't my first outdoor kind of expedition like this. It was the biggest one I've ever been on. I went for a 10-day snow caving, ice climbing expedition in the Canadian Rocky Mountains in March. I was a novice ice climber. I'd been a rock climber for several years, but ice was new to me. My climbing partner was trained as a lead climber. I made a mistake on this climb. It was a 500 or 600 foot climb, world famous climb. There were other teams on the ice that day. I made a mistake. My mistake culminated into our being stuck on the top of the climb as the temperatures dropped 30 degrees and hypothermia set in, and we had to fight our way off the mountain or die. That was the choice. We stay here, we die. We might die if we fight our way off, but we're definitely going to die if we stay here. So we had to 3 rappels down, traversing in the dark, hypothermia increasing with every step, uh, frostbite, deep cold, loss of our reasoning capacity, loss of our coordination, couldn't move our lips, eyeballs freezing in the back of my head. It's like those movies that are you can watch in the Himalayas, which I never ever watch those movies. It's too much of a trigger for me to so, but it's like those super high adventure mountaineering movies where people die. It's like that. And so we fight our way across the mountain, and it takes us all night long, and it's super dangerous. And we have all these things that happen to us, and we get to the top of the final rappel, and we're clipped into the mountain for the first time because this is a training place we're at. We're off the ice. We're on the rock. It's 150 feet down. There's carabiners epoxied on pins into the mountain, and we have straps. So we're strapped into the mountain for the first time. We're not going to fall, but the rope gets stuck. I have the rope. My partner is to my left. My climbing partner is to my left. I tie the rope off to my harness. I toss it out around the corner of this crag, and now this is like in the morning. So this is 12 hours later. We're exhausted. We don't have any food. We have water because we can suck on ice and eat snow and that kind of stuff. And but I pulled the rope, and the rope jammed on the I like 3 inches, and that thing just jammed into some kind of crevice, and I couldn't get it free. And now I have got like half a rope because the other half is off in space somewhere, laying against the mountain, and we can't go down and we can't go up. And it was at this point where my instinctual, animalistic hyper focus of my body wanting to survive. It's like down deep inside my primordial brain of where I wasn't really rationally trying to survive at this point. My body was doing it for me. But once the rope got stuck, I my rational brain's like, oh, you're not getting out of this. There's death here now. And I began to fall asleep because the advancing of hypothermia. I surrendered. I gave up my fight. And when I surrendered, I had this peace settle on me and I began to fall asleep. And then this last time after falling asleep, I stood up and the mountain disappeared. And I moved to the forward kind of forward of my body in a great darkness. And I could tell you the whole story. I know that you watched it, Dave, and the audience might want to find it elsewhere. I'll give some of the what happened to me. I went through a life review, and in my life review, the whole of my life was known, and most of it was illuminated, but there was this little tiny bit that wasn't, and that's the kind of part that I was trying to hide from the divine eye, the all-seeing eye, the omniscience. And I went through my life review where I suffered all the pain I gave everyone in my life from their point of view. And I suffered all of the reasons and emotions that I was having while that was going on, why I was doing this thing to them. And then I was judged myself. I went through the self-judgment and of my non-loving actions in comparison to, and the words do not capture this, unlimited, infinite, total belovedness. It does. There was so much. There was a tidal wave of love and a tidal wave of love that was the size of the universe, and it crashed down upon me, and I found myself absorbed into the light. I had a unitive experience. I had a whole bunch of levels of experience. I was in a unitive state where I had no more selfness left, and Peter was gone. There was no Peterness left at all. I was an orb of consciousness, experiencing truth, love, beauty, joy, knowledge, understanding, peace, bliss, adoration, uh, intellect, mercy in this expansive way, and they were all one singular beauty. And this singular beauty, I then had this experience where I was superpositioned with, kind of entangled with the divine field of photons. It was like this field of photons, individual photons. They were all all entangled with each other, and I was one of them. But the whole mass of them, all these them and many, were also oneness of being. And so when I was in this entanglement, I was simultaneously oneness of being and separate self, which I cannot explain to you. Everything I'm saying is in metaphor. And then I had this experience of unconditional love, where I could see the love pouring out of this greater darkness beyond the light itself. And this light was pouring out of itself, creating the structure, the physical and energetic structure of our real universe, woven inside of all things. And then the expansive nature of the divine self focused all of its creative love on me. And I understood that I was the most beloved in all of the universe. And then it showed me all of humanity. And I saw and understood that the same most belovedness in me was inside of every single person, no exceptions. And that love that was woven into the whole structure of everything there is also woven into humanity, and that basically people can't see it because it's underneath the 70,000 veils, but it's the only reality that there is. And then I was given a choice to stay or come home. Oh, no, I should say that's totally backward. Stay means being home, or come back here to exile. And I chose exile because I saw my parents' lives play out with me and without me, and the suffering with me was great. And there's like, not like great, they had a great suffering, but I mean like huge. And, but their suffering without me was like a nuclear bomb going off. And so I came back. I chose to come back. I picked the life I was going to live through all of the a million different choices. I chose a life near my new life, near the light itself, because all of these choices were interiorized. In the center of them was a single beam of light that emanated out. I chose a life near it, and then I went back into my body, and I got carried back in and shoved back inside, and I came back an entirely different person from the day before. And my life so radically changed. I initially couldn't tell who I was as a human being. My brain had been off, and my brain came back online, so there was the functionality of that happening, but it was also super cold. So my I don't people are like, how long were you out? I don't know, long enough that Tim was screaming and yelling at me, don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die, and shaking me. um Tim, by the way, was an atheist, and we never talked about it ever. um but I came back an entirely different person, knowing that I was not a human being. And I think that that was the radical shock of it all in the beginning, was that I knew I was not a human being. I saw other lives I had lived. I entered into previous lives and saw it through the eyes of those lives. And I know that I had lived many lives. I knew that my soul had an eternal nature to it, and that could live inside of other lives. And the lives I entered into, they seemed to be going on right when I was, even though they were in the past, I was in them on live time, like dropping in on a studio set somewhere, and they're doing the thing, and I'm participating as a character. And then I walk away, and then the show closes down. But from my point of view, it's still going on. Like, I don't know how to explain it. So I came back a totally different person. We self-rescued. The rope came free. We descended. I was on the National Ski Patrol. I've been skiing in the patrol since I was in high school, and so I was the wilderness first aid guy on this trip. And so we self-treated for hypothermia through the morning light hours, and we survived. And on the way home, more tragedy happened, and we went back to Montana. And I was traveling in a theater company for the spring all over the United States, and separated myself from everybody in the troupe and spent all of my time in meditation, because I couldn't say what had happened to me, because I had no language, and I didn't even understand it. All I knew was that when I was in the deep space of myself, the quietude of myself, I felt whole again. And everything around me in the world was all made of light. Light was like pouring out of this, like light pouring out of this glass. Only the glass is not made of glass, and it's made of rice paper, and everything in the world is completely fragile, and it's all darkness, and everything has this existence through this light. I kept my mouth shut for 20 years about it. I didn't go into architecture as a family business for graduate school. I went to divinity school, where I studied mysticism. I read the Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. I read the Yoga Sutras. Then I went to divinity school, and I incorporated the teachings of the Yoga Sutras into my interior yoga life. I was an early yoga person. I'm an alien. I live as an alien even today. I do. I Anyway, so I'm married and I have kids too. I also have a physical life. So that's the quick version of it.
That is an incredible story, man, and thank you so much for sharing. I have so many questions for you, I hardly know where to begin. So I'm just going to kind of pick one and go from there. You said that when you were, let's call it the other side, if you will,
Oh yeah.
that you felt that you were whole again. And I have a lot of questions surrounding that. So, do you believe that physical life is a more limited version of the unfiltered consciousness?
Yes, I do. And that my spiritual practices over 40 years have, I mean, I knew that intuitively and experientially, but my spiritual practices over 40 years have uh, shown that to be even more so true as an experiential as an experience, as I've aged, as I've practiced. So I came back with a definite yes and an intensity of it. And through the the spiritual work I've done, it's become more so, if that's even possible, because it's the same quality of energy. It's just the quantity is more available.
I wonder this often as a near-death experiencer myself, for me personally, I got as close to the light as I could without going through it. So I was left with more questions than answers, which brings me to this understanding that we see less than 1% of the light spectrum. I've never seen what this room really looks like. My second question is actually, if we could see 100% of the light spectrum, do you believe we would even be able to decipher the physical matter in front of us?
No, I would be in heaven. 100% is heaven, is no physicality at all. So there's like, I see a lot of light here, but as long as I'm physically here, I'm still seeing the physicality of everything. And I know that the light that I'm experiencing here, when I came back from my near-death experience, I came back with 1%, say. But I was in a world where nobody could see that 1%. And all I wanted was the 100%. And I've been back. I had a Kundalini awakening at one point years after this happened. And during this experience, I was in 100% of the light. Only because I was 100% of the light, there was no me there. I could only understand that I had been there after it had gone, after I came back. I only could understand that myself had become the 100% when I had a self to come back to, when I was back in myself. But when I was in the 100%, it was the 100%. That 100% extends infinitely. It has no borders. It has no restrictions.
I find it very peculiar that we find ourselves alive, which is the only state we've known as far as we know. We don't even know what the self is. I often refer to it as I don't know what I am or what you is like. But do you think maybe the self is kind of like a specifically directed like representation of the whole?
The lower self?
Well, that's a whole other story. The higher self and is the lower self the part of us that incarnates physically?
Wow. Okay. So those are fundamentally important questions. So the and it's paradoxical. So it was paradoxical on the other side, it's paradoxical on this side as well. So my whole self is here, but my experience of my whole self is limited through my filter and my lower self. When talking about lower self in this case, all throughout the history of the world, mystics have been trying to articulate this. And so there's different languages from different cultures, and the meanings sometimes overlap. And so when I'm talking about lower self, I'm talking about my egoic identity, that thing of my mind, my consciousness that I experience as a human being, which, as you rightly pointed out, we have no idea in science how that even starts. How does this exist? But we near-death experiencers, we know that our consciousness inhabits the body. But the funny thing is that the body also inhabits that consciousness. And so that the body is more like a Russian stacked doll, and in the center is my physicality, and on the exterior is my soul. But my experience from the little tiny little baby one in the middle, that's where my consciousness resides in this world. And so my pursuit of my spiritual life is to still myself, surrender myself enough so that I can experience this higher energetic vibration of my true and whole self within the context of my lower self. And so as long as I'm in the physicality, I have this experience of both at the same time. And so, and yet the highest self supersedes this lower one immensely. Does that answer your question or?
Like from my perspective, it makes sense. Like there's the lower self comes here, the higher self stays up there. Now, this higher self, this is really where it starts to boggle my brain, right? People say that we are all one. Is it multiple of ourselves in that bigger light, or is that light literally one consciousness that breaks off into all of our physical selves?
Plan B. So it's this oneness. It's in my near-death experience, it was simultaneously them and plural and singular, but that was only in its light form. So there is a form that precedes its light form. There's okay, do I come into this? The unlimited creates limitation to experience the world, the universe, different life forms. And so in and of itself, it is an unlimited oneness, but it produces it creates smaller parts of itself in order to experience the world. Um, so it's both at the same time. We have these individuated selves in terms of when I was in heaven, I was both an individuated consciousness and entangled with the oneness. It wasn't one or the other. It was both simultaneously, more like a communion than a union, except that the union aspect of it superseded the communion aspect of it, by which I mean that there was a oneness that was perceivable to me from a state in which I still had some kind of identity. But it wasn't human identity. It wasn't Peter at all. It was a soul self that was made of the same substance of the divine, and yet somehow on a lower level. And then, so this is one more step I want to bring into this, the light that people talk about, the unitive experience of light that people talk about, which is how I live. That's my world. I live in that unitive experience of light. It's with all sorts of trouble and beauty all the time. An awakening is not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy journey. So don't think that it's not you personally, but just think it's not all roses and ice cream. It, beyond the light itself, in my near-death experience, there was a greater darkness that was impenetrable to my separate self. So even though I was an orb of consciousness that was massive, and my thinking was my being was my, I thought it and there I was, kind of thing. There was no difference between my thought and what happened. There was a greater darkness that I could not see beyond where infinity exists. And in that infinite state is this oneness itself that is even beyond that word. It's just consciousness. And so, yeah, everything is consciousness here. Everything is made. What's the word that I read? Panpsyism. I think that's the word. That everything in the universe arises from consciousness. Panpsyism. I think that's it. All one psyche.
I'm really glad you brought up the darkness that you are unable to penetrate. And I don't know if I'm missing the mark here, but were you suggesting that there's a darkness that you cannot penetrate in the soul form from the other side? In other words, is physical life our way of penetrating into the darkness? And by doing so, are we bringing light to it?
And it's not a negative darkness, it's a blindness. It's my blindness. So the the cre the creator, out of this greater darkness, the light emanates itself as a creation. The light itself is a creation of the darkness. And the darkness is to be at one with the darkness is to be obliterated from selfhood. And that's what happens in a Kundalini awakening where there is no more self left. So that can happen here as well. It's just that it's always a temporary state here. Over there, over there, all I wanted was to be reabsorbed into the oneness beyond all there is. And that included the light itself. Because in that state, that's who I actually am. I knew that, but I couldn't get, and the darkness was just my limitedness, not being able to see infinity. Infinity is infinite. And even in my hyper conscious meta state, there was still limited in comparison to the greater darkness. And as it turns out, I'm not the only one who's thought about this or come to that experience. Meister Eckhart in the 1300s, 13th century, he had that experience where there was a greater darkness and impenetrable. I got so obsessed by this that I decided to see, one, how do I figure out how to language this? What happened to me? How do I figure out how to language this? Are there other people in the history of the world like me? And what do they have to say about it? And it turns out that there are sort of universal, although rare, uh, mystical experiences that parallel what happened to me. And so when I talk about the greater darkness, it's not a negativity, and it's so far beyond form that my human form could never approach it. And in the Hebrew scriptures, in the Torah, it talks about how Moses had to hide his eyes and couldn't see the form of God, or he would die. That's kind of what it's talking about. Where if I were to enter, once I enter, it's kind of like some samadhi or satori. When you enter into this place, you can't be there when you get there, because if you are there when you get there, then you're not there. And that in this infinite darkness out of which all comes is like that. It's all I want. I want that.
You had said that you chose the direction of your new life before coming back, and I'm very curious about this because I've heard other people say that they chose their lives before being born. How much of a pull do you think we have individually in terms of the place that we get plopped in? You know, the life that you live right now. Do you think we choose our lives, basically?
When I was 5 years old, I had my first mystical experience where I was pulled from my body and brought into what people might call the void, but it's not an empty space. It's just darkness. And I was inside this angelic being, and I had this meet in the darkness is the divine. The whole divine is the darkness and more. I had this meeting with the divine who told me that I worked that my this lifetime I worked for the divine, and it was a reminder. It's like, I'm bringing you back here. Come back to the home office. You got to check in. You got to make sure that you know what your task is, and then sends me back. And I knew that I had, for this lifetime, chosen to be a worker bee for the sun, sun, the sun, the divine being. And I don't remember what the rules were, though. All I know is that that was my job. I didn't come back with a rule book or what my life would be like. When I died and came back, there were a million different doorways that I could choose from. And in the center of all of these doorways was a singular beam of radiant light that was coming from this darkness. Now I was outside the dark. I was outside of heaven. I couldn't see back into it. I was inside of this angelic being condensed preparation for getting back in my body. I was told to choose light, choose a life. And this beam of light was ginormous. And out of it, all of these doorways, like a million flower petals, were all doorways into lives. And to the outer edges, there was a fading of the light, a darkening. And the voice said, and I had an instant to make these decisions. And it said, choose light, choose a life. And I wanted to have some selfness. I wanted some separation. I know that it was telling me to choose the purity of the light, and I didn't. I had enough of my own selfishness at this point that I chose, and I chose things like creative, um, creative and a little bohemian, a little alternative, deep spirituality. Very rapidly, I chose these things, and then the door opened, and I went down this tunnel. And I went down this tunnel back to my body. There were 10,000 doors inside this tunnel. And these doorways led into all of the other tunnels because those doorways all led to these other tunnels. And yet in the middle of them all was this light. And so that was sort of next to me through the doorways. I've traveled enough in the world in what used to be called third world nations and in on the edges of war zones to see that there's great suffering in the world. And to say that I chose my life sounds like when people say, well, you chose your cancer, you made that decision. I see whole nations of people suffering under totalitarianism, for instance, and starvation. I don't think that I chose my individual life. I think I chose the pattern that my life could lead. I had all of these lives, all of these tunnels were all probabilities of things that I could live in my life as I made choices left and right, as people around me who have greater power than I do politically and economically make decisions that impact my life, which is why most of these poor people that I was seeing were suffering because other people made decisions around society and war. And so my decision-making process to lead the life I want to live isn't it has much more to do with choosing to be attached to the light itself because I think I made a mistake in making the choice that I did. I should have just chosen the full light. And if I have to come back, maybe next time I will. But I've spent my entire life choosing the light over and over and over and over and over again, either through my meditative practices or through my interactions with people in the daily living of my life, uh, both of which are practices that I keep. And so, did I choose to live the life I'm living? Doesn't really matter to me so much anymore as me choosing to live the life of light as much as I can in the life that I'm living, because this is I know that this is a temporary place for me. I saw my other lives. I had 1,000 other lives. This is not my first go round, and none of them were me. None of them are me. I'm always this other higher self. That's actually who I am. That's who I know I am. I knew that when I came back, and that's the life that I'm choosing. I'm not trying to choose. I make choices in my physical life. I've got a family, I got a grandkid, I got to mow the lawn, clean the toilets, all the make a living, all that stuff. But my real choice has much more to do with my eternal nature than it does with my physical nature. I try to make sure that I pay my bills and I try to be a responsible adult, but that's temporary for me.
If I understand you correctly, it's almost like you choose the like foundational intentions, but it's not exactly like you're choosing specific life events. It's just a higher percent chance based on what the foundation is.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. I think a little bit in that direction as well. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that every single life event is planned. I think it's more so like a set of possibilities, like you said. Um,
And it feels like it was intended. So when I enter into I have deja vu all the time. So when I get into a situation where I'm like, oh yeah, I lived this before, it's because I'm still connected to this field of probabilities that become possibilities as choices are made, that become actualities as I actually make a choice. And all of them are potentials until the moment that all these pressures create the moment I'm in.
Speaking of foundational choices, you could have chose the purity of the light, but you wanted to have individuality. You wanted to have a self. There's almost like a rebellious nature to that. Do you think there's some sort of rebellious nature to physical life?
It definitely is for me. I've been sort of a rebel my whole life. Even before this happened, I was marching to the beat of a different drummer. My parents would tell me all the time, "You got your own drum there, Peter, and you're walking your own beat." And that's so. In terms of everybody else, I can't speak for everybody else, but I can definitely speak for me. Some of that's uh, psychological characteristics. Some of it might be DNA, but I was definitely the kid where if you told me no, I would think, oh, well, maybe yes.
That kind of ties into like people ask what is the purpose and the meaning of life, and in my opinion, I think it's decided by the individual, right? The purpose of my life is not the purpose of my neighbor's life, right? I dedicate myself for 25 years to skateboarding, but the person, the school teacher who has never rode a skateboard, it's not their purpose, right? It means nothing to them, skateboarding. So I think it's up to the individual, which kind of answers my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. I was going to ask, is there a playful nature to life, or is that, I mean, it seems to be up to the individual as well.
I think it's up to the individual as well, but I certainly enjoy a fun time. One of the things because the world is so full of suffering and darkness, why not enjoy yourself as much as you can while you're here and play as frequently as possible? That's how I've chosen to live my life as much as I can because it can be funny too. I mean, it can be really funny if you play along.
When I first started this, I wasn't sure how much I should like really joke around with the guests because of like the serious nature of the topic, but like, I can't help it. It's like who I am. I goof around and, but I still try to be professional.
I heard this said once, never confuse seriousness with solemnity. A lot of people want to be solemn, but you can be serious and funny at the same time. And I think it's great that you allow yourself humor and fun because it makes it not only more human, it makes it more enjoyable. And uh, I think that, well, life is so hard in so many ways. Why not laugh when you can?
I'll be talking to my pet bird, just like telling jokes to it, you know. You said that you were shown some past lives, potentially thousands of lives. Do you believe that we're going back and forth in between these, the physical state and the state of being an orb of consciousness? Do you think it's a back and forth?
I think so, but I also think that when I was back there, I was connected to the united state of being. I was the communion. I was way far above any sort of physicality. And I entered into some of the physicality because I was curious and I was allowed to. Yeah, it seems from the higher point of view, it sure looked like I was. Let me put it this way. There was a I was above in this entangled state as a singular photon entangled with this ultimate intimate infinite field of individual photons all entangled with each other, and I was this individual photon in this entanglement, and below me was the long tail of my incarnating soul. So I was my soul, but I was also above this part of me that all these worlds, all these other lives, they were sort of inside of. So there was this superstructure, and I describe it pretty often as like a baguette, a really long baguette emanating out of the darkness, in which there were olives. And it's an olive bread, and there's all these olives, and they're all like little worlds, and I am living all of them, but the olives aren't the bread. They're in the bread, and they're part of the bread, but the bread is different. I'm the bread. The lives I was living were not. So even though when I came back from the life I had just lived and had ended, all of these lives were going on simultaneously. I was above them all and I was in them all at the same time, but none of them were really me. I was this other part. And so what I expect, what I if I have to come back here again, which I may, I don't know. Um, but if I have to come back here again, I will the way I experience it now is that I much of myself was left behind when I came here, was above me, and my interior world of carving my space to reconnect has reconnected me, and so I have better access to this baguette. And so if I have to come back in, I might do this loopity loop thing, in and out, in and out, out. But the more I think there was a progression of my soul. And I think that in the progression of my soul in this lifetime, I know who I am. And I know that you know who you are because you died. And so there's lots of us who've had near-death experiences, tens of millions of us who have had these experiences. I don't think I earned my near-death experience. Maybe that was in the plan because it's also like we were talking about choices that we make, but my whole life pattern seems to have been consistently a setup for this near-death experience. There is that paradox too. I feel like I was led that way. But there's a whole lot of us now who know that we're not the consciousness we're living in. And so, yes, there is this up and down, up and down, up and down. And I kind of went off subject a little bit there.
How do you believe that humanity, how do I word this? How do you think this world would look like if human beings knew like the nature of consciousness? Like, I mean, this would have to be a global shift. I don't even think the planet, personally, I don't think the planet would look the same at all. How do you think the world's population would take this if they just unlocked all the secrets, so to speak? The
Well, there'd be no more famine and no more war. There'd be no more violence and abuse. There'd be no more hatred. There'd none, all of the very strongly negative aspects of human individuality and society as a result, they would vanish because they can't coexist with the divine light. It would be an entirely different society.
if people were sitting here knowing exactly where they came from and exactly where they're going, I don't see a lot of the system that's in place now. I don't see it even being able to operate. I think people would opt out of a lot of things. And probably treat people a lot better as well, you know? If they had any idea that you're gonna experience the pain that you dish out to others, for example, you know, for me, that's reason enough to be kind, to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of that, when you talk about the kind of self-judgment that you gave yourself during your life review, how much do you think that plays into the decision-making process in the future, right? When you talk about the decision to either choose the light or choose individuality in the self, do you think the judgment in your life review plays into your next upcoming choices?
Oh, it 100% does. Good question. My whole life is based on that, not wanting to go through that again. I describe it as the divine fire of purgative love. It burned away the selfishness that I carried with me, to which I was attached. It dematerialized my karma. If I cannot have to go through that again, that'd be great. If I have to go through that again, so be it. It's okay because love awaits, and I'll be an enthusiastic person for my negative life review. But in the individual choices that I make in this lifetime, I definitely try to do as minimal harm as I possibly can every day of my life.
When you were on the mountain, when you were ice climbing and you were on the mountain, and you said that towards the end you had this animalistic instinct that came out of you, whereas your body was almost making the decision to survive.
Mhm.
Do you believe that the way we live now, whereas we go to the grocery store to get food, we don't sleep outside with one eye open under threat of being eaten alive constantly. Do you believe the way that we live now, as convenient as is it detaching us from that animalistic survival instinct?
Oh, probably to a certain extent. So I have to say yes and no to that. I've been twice in my life under violent physical threat that involved law enforcement in serious situations, and I slept with one eye open. And I think that there are circumstances in people's lives where they sleep with one eye open. And so my experiences had nothing to do with domestic violence, but in domestic violence situations, people are, whether they're children or adults, often sleep with one eye open, even if it's only figuratively. And so the animalistic nature of humanity, for the majority of people, I think it's minimalized. So yes, I think that going to the grocery store and not having to worry about heat, for instance, if you turn on your heat, the heat comes on, you got running water, you got a job, you got money in the bank, you can survive. You don't have to face the saber-tooth tiger every day or the bear. Um, but I still think that humanity, we are essentially animals, and our selfish nature raises its raises its head in the most affluent country club societies and in the greatest poverty and everywhere in between. We are living separate from nature, though, 100% separate from nature. And nature is a soothing balm to the world-weary soul. It's an experience for me, and I see you shaking your head, and I think you probably tell me if this is your experience, that nature speaks to you, that it has a presence, a resonance when you're in the presence of a forest or a plant and you're touching it. It's like it's a living thing that feeds you. And I think that humanity would be better off should that happen. So it turns out that I'm not the only one who thinks that. I mean, I experienced that from my NDE, but for instance, the city of Roanoke, Virginia, they are choosing to greenify their city because it reduces violent crime. The more we're connected to nature, the more we treat each other with humanity. So I think that's a big thing that's missing is we're our separate nature from ourself.
Not to be too nitpicky here, but to be clear, I was nodding my head and agreeing with you. I know you said the word shaking, and I don't want the audience to think
Oh, right. No, it was nodding. It was nodding. Sorry, you were nodding, not shaking.
it's
My
totally fine. I
mistake.
just want to be clear because I
You're
do
right.
agree.
You're
I think there's a
right.
connection there, and it's hard to explain, but it's so simple. Sometimes you could just go outside and you just observe wildlife and watch the trees, going in the wind. And there's something about it that's so simple, but you can't even put it into words. It really puts it into perspective. And I really like the fact that you brought up human beings being wild animals. I ask people this often. Human beings, we think of ourselves as separate, but we're only separated from nature. We're not separate from all of these other species. We're exactly the same. Well, we're not built exactly the same. We might have some advantages, but that's the only thing that separates us. Have you ever looked at footage of gorillas like laughing? You ever like look in their eyes and it's like you're looking at a person. You're like, this is a real person, and it's incredible. And so now when I see the birds flying outside, I'm like, those are people that just so happen to know how to fly.
That's the way I see them too. I call them people in my head, the four-legged furry people and the winged people and the insect people, and for sure I do.
Yeah, it really puts it into perspective, to the point where people often say this, but even me, I'm like, I don't like spiders, but I'll try to get them out of the house. The last time I killed a spider, I felt so bad. It messed with my mind all night long. I'm like, I just ended that person's life for what?
Or
Because I was.
sent it on to its next incarnation.
Yeah, well, possibly that's what I did. But that connection to nature and wildlife and understanding that we're not as separate as we think, I think that can translate into a positive for the other species on the planet. We could stop destroying them, let's say, and maybe do something a little better instead. Too
Well,
much
we
of a
can
tangent.
do that. Living spirituality has to do with connection with nature. I'm 100% alongside you in that, and I think that people who the rewilding movement has become a movement now, and people are rewilding their yards, for instance, and doing it just this small little thing where they're doing their part to stop the insect apocalypse. When I was a kid, we had to clean off the bumper and windshield and headlights of our car every day, every day, because they were covered with thousands of smashed bugs. I don't remember the last time I had to clean a bug off my windshield. Not that I'm thinking, what I'm saying is that our impact is so great that we don't even know it. And little acts of love and kindness make a difference to that one spider.
I agree with that for sure. It's literally to a point with me where it's like I have hornets on the patio, right? I have hornets and bees nest, and like I can't let them. But then you're in that paradoxical spot, right? I can't let them take over the house, but I don't
Right.
want to kill them either. And then you're, at a certain.
Shared space, shared space.
It's tough, right? For example, like
Right.
let's say if a spider lays an egg or lays, I think they lay like hundreds of eggs or
Oh,
something like this.
yes.
If you were to come home and there's literally 400 spiders in your house, at a certain point, you can't just let them take over the house. But if it's less than that, it's kind of like, well, let's see if we could just remove them and not destroy them. So it
Well,
depends.
because you're an animal and animals are always consuming each other, it's okay to protect your nest from their nest. And I have definitely lived that way. I live in the country, and if the red squirrels who invade my house, if I allowed them to live in my house, then everything would be destroyed. They have to respect my space too, and that means I have to have strong boundaries at sometimes. And I've definitely had that spider experience you describe with 1,000 spiders running all over one room. I mean, what do you
Oh my
do?
God.
It's like you gotta, okay, sorry, can't catch you all. It's time
Bro,
for
I would
drastic measures.
I would probably move out of the entire state if if I came home to 1,000 spiders. I wouldn't go back into that house for weeks. I don't know. That's
Oh,
just me. It would.
I was lucky to have caught them as it all happened. I had to use drastic measures. I'll just leave it at that. I had to use drastic measures because otherwise I would not have been able to stay in the house.
Bro, I would be ordering a flamethrower off of. I'm not going to say off of where because I don't get free
Right,
advertising.
right, right, right.
Ah, I caught myself there. I almost did it. It's a fun little game. I almost give free advertising all the time, and every time I don't do it, I'm like, yes. If you could ask one question to the person watching this video right now, what would it be?
What is it that you truly want in life?
That is a fantastic question. Do you have any advice for those that might have not had a near-death experience and still has this, kind of fear of death or just existential questions in general? Do you have any advice that you could potentially give to them of comfort?
A lot of people who are afraid of death watch a lot of videos on YouTube about near-death experience. And a lot of people who watch a lot of near-death experience videos reach a state of mind where they're no longer fearful.
So Peter, if people want to find more of your videos and books, etc., where is it that they can find you? Of course, we'll put all the links in the description as well.
All my links are through PeterPanagore.Love. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. And I'm available in particular to help people who've had spiritually transformative experiences that have left them wondering how to integrate, because awakening is not a piece of apple pie with ice cream. I spend a lot of my life helping people integrate.
Thank you so much for being here, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to speak again. To everyone watching, thank you so much for your sliver of time. This has been ours, and thanks again, Peter.
Thanks, Dave. Peace to you all. Peace to everyone.
In other words, like when I get to ask people like yourself these questions, it's like half of it's for me. Like
Of
I enjoy
course.
picking your brain on this stuff. So
Pick my brain.
so I think maybe I had what you were saying backwards about the
I think you did, but it's totally cool. I'm glad to
yeah.
clarify.
Yeah, well, I'm actually super happy you did. Now I understand it even better. So, dude, that's half my problem during these. I'm always getting a scratchy throat.
Got to
Um,
have water. Water is a good thing.
oh yeah. So my next question is here. I'm gonna take one second.
Yeah, because I was a pastor in a church for years, I boldly drink on camera. I have a glass and I just in the middle of my talk, I'll take a drink because that's human.
Yeah.
So
I
drink away, my friend.
when you were how do I put this? There should be a tally of how many times I say how do I put this during the interview. We'll have like a running count. Um, okay.